Thank you all for coming, and greetings to all the people that might view this on the closed circuit TV you have here in Powers. Again, I'm here, and I recognize many of you, if not most of you. Are any people here that have not heard me before? Or can't remember?
What's your name?
Oh, my name is on the handouts, okay? But basically, I'll just give you a little bit of background on myself. I graduated Harvard College, have a degree in psychology, sociology, and cultural anthropology. Served in the United States Air Force in Korea. Came back and attended Columbia Graduate Business School, where I have an MBA in international business. Had a number of jobs and ended mostly with the IBM Corporation for 30 years, and I worked in marketing, management, and in education. The last 8 years, I've been giving talks to libraries, assisted living, independent living, private organizations, and to JCCs and other organizations such as that, community centers. So that's who I am. It's my background for the most part. My name is on the handout, Howard Sherdock. It's on the handout.
Howard Sherdock?
It's on the handout. Do you have a handout? That's not my handout. This lady doesn't have a handout. So the fact is that I have been here a number of times and spoken to you on a number of topics. Tonight's topic is a very key one in today's world, freedom. What is it? Now, basically, I permit people to talk when I will give you the sign to do so, but I want to establish my thesis first before we go into that session. But you have the handout so that you can not have to take notes, so that you can refer to it later if you wish. I'm only here for a short time, and have discussions perhaps with other friends or family that you might want to discuss that with. In essence, I'm trying to give a college course in an hour, and that so I have to establish my thesis before we get into a question or people wanting to make a point, which I permit. I think that's part of the positive thing of doing this kind of thing, is that you are permitted to voice your opinions. But before I, let me state this. The basic point in freedom, what is it? Is that it is a concept. That freedom is a word with a definition that can be all over the place. And as we get into the discussion of what freedom is, you'll understand that, and you'll have maybe a better appreciation of that situation. We are in the throes of a struggle in this country and in the world with freedom as the central issue. We are in a war in Iraq for that reason. We are somewhat in a war in this country for that reason as well. And we'll get into the details of that. But the basic thing is freedom, as defined, has meant different things to different people through the millennium. If you lived in ancient Greece, in ancient Athens, for example, yes, the freedom was born in these climates, but the fact is that freedom was meant only for certain people. Freedom was meant for people who were citizens. And if you were not a citizen, then you were not free. You were not free. If you were a woman in most of these societies, in these free societies, you were not free. So freedom was only for certain people, and that's still true today. But going back 2,000 years or longer, freedom was wonderful if you were in the top echelon, if you were the king, if you were the noble person, if you were the major person with money in that particular country or tribe or whatever organization it was, you were free. You were free to do whatever you wanted to do. Were other people free? No, they had to generally follow what you wanted them to do. So freedom existed, but it was only for a select number of people. And that's true in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and this was codified. They had laws in those days defining who was free and who was not free, and what the people who were free could do and what they could do, and what the people that were not free. Slaves had rights in ancient Rome, written down rights, so that it wasn't slavery as this country knew in the 18th, 17th, and 18th centuries. It was different. So there were things different, but freedom as a concept still existed. It wasn't for everybody, but it existed. Now this was, we all know the Bible story, right? What did the Jews do to want freedom out of Egypt? That's what the Exodus is, isn't it? So they fled the slavery of Egypt and lived for 40 years in the desert, correct? The point is, freedom as a concept is in the Bible, and it's mentioned many times in the Bible. Slaves are mentioned in the Bible, and the rights of slaves were mentioned in the Bible. So slavery and freedom seem to go hand in hand, don't they? The fact is, even with the growing amount of freedom, countries with freedom being as a base now, we have still slavery around the world today, okay? Just recently in the National Geographic, there was a major article on 21st century slaves. There are slaves all over this world today, in India, in the Arabian world, and in this country as well. There are slaves. So freedom is something, the other end of the spectrum of slavery, but it exists in free societies today. And I don't want to go into detail about that. We can talk about that at length at another time. The fact is, freedom is still the overall, let's say, philosophy under which we live, but we still have people who are not free. We had freedom established in the 1770s when we established a constitution that said everybody was created equal, but yet the slaves weren't free. Women weren't free. Women weren't freed. Well, let's talk about the slaves first. They were freed in 1860s, right? The Civil War. 600,000 people died here to free the slaves. Were the slaves free? No. It wasn't until the 1960s and the Civil Rights Act that the blacks were really freed in this country. Women were free. Why not in the 1700s, right? No, not until 1920. In our lifetime, for some of you, that women became free in the eye of the law and eye of the government. So freedom was established as an ideal in the 1700s, and that came about in this country because our founding fathers had an ideal of what freedom was. From what? From knowing the history of England, the Magna Carta, the history of France with the philosophers, which I have listed here, some of those who were the prime, let's say, the germ, the thinking germ that our founding fathers believed in. John Locke, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire, Adam Smith. These people had written in their time and just before the time of our founding fathers, and our founding fathers as not, let's say, ideal people themselves. They were philanderers, some of them. They were slave owners, some of them. But they had an ideal. You know, there's always a difference between all of our ideals and what our actions are. I'm sure all of us have high ideals, but sometimes we are weak and we will do something that's not totally either legal or ethical or moral. Well, that's how our founding fathers were. They had an ideal, and that's what they put into the Constitution, which we have been taking advantage of these several centuries. And it was the philosophers and the governments and the ideas of what happened in England and in France that really fed into how we were established. Now, what other things happened? Obviously, all this was built into the Reformation, the Middle Ages, even going back to the age where Leonardo da Vinci and the great Italian artists and artisans existed. They fought for freedom. They exhibited freedom, individuality. That's what it became. Because before that time, people were only thought of as in groups, not as individuals. And they were permitted to express themselves. So this is the beginnings of freedom. It became something that grew. It wasn't something immediately available. The church dominated in those days, and people that didn't go along with church doctrine had a big problem, as it is today in certain societies, even today. But freedom, the germ of freedom grew, but it was always a little different. We live under a system of freedom here that is totally different than any other system. It's different than what we're trying to create in Iraq, as an example. We all know the disaster of Iraq, but the fact is the ideal of what we wanted is still valid. We would like some freedoms for those people because that makes us, let's say, freer and safer, and the world for that matter. But it is a different concept of freedom. It is a different concept of freedom. So all these wars and things have been fought over the centuries. Now, the latest war before this particular situation we're in now was what? Really was the Cold War with the totalitarian communist government of Russia. We still have communist governments, don't we? In Cuba, in North Korea, in China. China exhibits, fortunately, some of the elements of freedom now that never really existed there before. Through the centuries, through the millennium, they had warlords, they had kings, they had people who were totally autocratic. And they still are a communist country, and you cannot do many things. And many people suffer in China. Yet freedom is growing in China. And freedom in China is a different concept than freedom here. They are fed, they are allowed to establish their own businesses today, and many of them have become millionaires. But some of them cannot even travel out of the country, even being millionaires. They cannot do and think and pray as you or I have the ability to do. So freedom is this much, not this much. But freedom is growing in that huge country. Is it growing in North Korea? I don't think so. We don't know very much about North Korea, do we? We think it's terrible, and it probably is. And in Cuba, it's a mixed bag. The point is that freedom is a different concept wherever you go and whatever government you believe in and whatever style of life that you choose to have. Now, in this country, we have challenges to that freedom as well. It's a moving target, so to speak. We have two things which are happening here which impact our freedom. One is there's a religious growth in this country which says, think the way I do and do what I do, and you fall in line. And what I do is more important, or what I think is more important than what you think. And in terms of security, we have another issue. As a matter of fact, just came out today that more and more people are willing to give up more and more freedoms in order to be secure. That's the beginning of something that has very dire consequences. When you give up freedoms, you sometimes don't get them back. And that is a big struggle in this country at this point in our lives. Now, this is the basic thesis that I'm covering tonight, freedom. Now, does anybody have anything that they would like to? Now, we could talk. Some woman came up to me before tonight program began and said, do I want to talk about Ariel Sharon? Because of what, as you all know, he's probably in very bad condition and probably will not come back to lead any party in Israel. So that may impact us, absolutely, and freedom as such, because he was making strides to move towards an accommodation with Palestine and and expressing much of the feelings of the Israelis that they wanted this relaxation between the two peoples. Now we have people on the hard right who might really try to stop that, and that may very well come about. But right now, that is an issue. It is a freedom issue, as many things today are freedom issues. And we can talk about our government here and how they have subverted the whole idea of free speech or free actions by trying to pass laws and put things into place which say Well, we want it this way, and that's the only way. Now, again, I turn it over to you people. Is there anybody here that would like to make a comment about anything on this particular topic? I can always count on you. What is your name, sir?
Mike Barnett.
Mike Barnett, remember that. Okay.
You mentioned before that we went into Iraq to provide democracy for the inhabitants. Wasn't that a phony excuse for going into Iraq?
We went into Iraq.
You said
My wife will take this to whoever
you
is
said to
going to
establish
talk.
democracy there.
We went into Iraq to establish democracy.
That's what you said.
Yes. And
Wasn't that a phony excuse to going into Iraq?
it was a phony, no, wrong. We didn't go into Iraq originally, as stated by the government, to establish democracy. According to the government, it was to prevent Saddam Hussein from using weapons of mass destruction.
Which was
So
it?
that was not the reason. It has now become the reason. But originally, my view was, not then and it is now, that it was the underlying reason that they went in, and they found an excuse acceptable to the American public for doing it. Why is it important for the Middle East to have a level of democracy? It's important for the world, for the Middle East to have established within it some countries who can become some semblance of a democratic state. It's important because oil is important, number one. Oil is important, number one. It's important to the Chinese, the Indians, to us, to the Europeans. What just happened in Ukraine when Russia stopped the oil and the natural gas from coming in? It not only affected Ukraine, it affected the pipelines to Europe. They got very nervous in Europe. If we were to bomb Iran, because Iran is probably the next terror state of great significance, do you think we would be in trouble with the Chinese and the Indians who have signed contracts for oil with them?
Yes.
The point is that we have to be aware of what the world situation is. And one of the things they did, I think one of the very deep underlying reasons we went into Iraq was something that the American public would not buy. That was, we're trying to establish a level of freedom there. He was a nasty person, Saddam Hussein, right? He did invade Kuwait. He did send Scuds to Israel. He did have an atomic weapons plant 10, 15 years ago that the Israelis had to wipe out. So he was not a nice person. He gassed the Kurds, and he killed the Shiites like they were, less than people, correct? The point is, that's not a reason. I agree with you for going in. But the reason is, eventually, that part of the world is vitally important to the rest of the world, and oil is a problem, and it is a necessity to secure that supply. It's kind of warm here, right? You like it warm? You like lights?
Yes.
You like to take a bus or a car or a plane somewhere? Well, do you want to pay $200 a barrel for gasoline? Because didn't they cut off the oil here once? In this country in the 70s, didn't they? Were there lines for gasoline? Well, what happens if some dictator there did the same thing today? You'd all be suffering. Freedom is important because in free societies, you have a growth of middle-class people. You have people who are interested in their families and in going to college and in feeding themselves better and taking a little vacation here, maybe even a vacation home there. That's what freedom brings to people. And if you're in dictatorial societies, what happens? Yes, people do that. The very wealthy, the very wealthy. You think the top brass in communist Russia didn't have dachas somewhere? Didn't travel? Didn't do everything? Don't you think the top brass in Saudi Arabia, the people who have all the money and power, they charter planes and fly wherever they want? They go spend a summer in Switzerland. They go gamble on the casino in Monte Carlo. Are you kidding? Las Vegas is filled with these people. The point is, those people are all free. They're wonderful. But what about the average person? They don't get any of that. Freedom is necessary in the Middle East. Israel is necessary because that's the only place where there is freedom. Not our freedom. It's not the same totally, but it's as close as you can get to a free society. And that's why Sharon, it is important. So I said to the lady, yes, I will bring up Sharon because he was a new sign that there was movement, and he was now buying into a thing which would perhaps help the Palestinians, because unless the Palestinians feel they have something at stake, a business, an income, some sort of ability to make money and to have businesses there, then they're going to be terrorists because they will take it out on the nearest neighbor who they hate anyway, and that's the Jews and Israel. So therein lies in Sharon's importance to us in the Middle East, and freedom's importance to us in Israel and in Iraq and in Iran. We have programs, secret and otherwise, in Iran to try to get the younger people there. Most of the people in Iran are under 30, and get them to feel like they want what the rest of the world wants. Has it been successful to this point? Not, because the mayor of Tehran, who's now the president, now wants to wipe out Israel, correct? So the point is, it's desperate struggle here, desperate struggle for us, and really it should be for the rest of the world, to fly the flag of freedom. We cannot pull out of Iraq. That's disaster. Even the people who say pull out of Iraq, we're losing people. It is sad and terrible. We're losing money and blood there. But we made the commitment there, and we have to stay there. Is it going to be successful? I don't think you can tell us, or they can tell us, or anybody can tell us, because it can evolve into a theocratic state like Iran, and you have Sharia law take charge, and women will lose the rights again, and we will then be into a very dastardly situation. It's not a pleasant thing we're into, okay? But we have to try to establish freedom there. Freedom is important to our survival. Internationally, I'll talk about nationally, because we have a struggle here, too. Yes, ma'am?
Nationally, how do you feel about the treatment of so-called peaceful protesters?
Well, can you repeat that to the microphone, please?
On
Can
a
you
national
identify yourself?
level.
Can you identify yourself?
Yes. Ann Halley. How do you feel on a national level? How do you feel about the treatment of so-called peaceful protesters during the Republican convention? They were incarcerated for a number of days.
You're saying, how do I feel about the peaceful protesters during the Republican
Yes.
convention? What peaceful
Well,
protesters?
I understand many said they were peaceful, but they were put in jail for a number of days.
Well, this is an item. It's not a national item that we're talking. We're talking about, we can talk about a lot of individual events such as that, which I don't really care to comment about, because that could be one police captain or one municipality doing this, that, or the other. It's like saying, what do I think about what happened in Dover, Pennsylvania, about the intelligent design, where they had the school committee voted to have intelligent design taught in science classes. Yes, that was significant because it reverberated around the country, but you're talking about an individual event that is an individual event. I don't have a comment on that other than that. Yes? Yes, ma'am.
It may sound sophomoric, but
It may sound,
sophomoric and innocent, but my question is...
Talking to the mic.
My question is, oil is so important. Why, with all our beautiful scientists, why can't we find a substitute? Like some people have found substitutes and do something with the cause.
yeah, there are substitutes, and people are, obviously, there's an economic interest in developing substitutes, such as solar energy, atomic. First of all, let's talk atomic energy, which is a major substitute, yet they're going to build one right here, on the golf course. They're going to, the government is taking over the golf course, and they're putting an atomic plant right here. Did you know that? They didn't tell you that here? Oh, would you be angry? Would you be upset? No. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not in my backyard. That's the theory. What happened on Shoreham here in Long Island? What happens up the Hudson? I spoke this morning in Riverdale. You know, when I mentioned atomic energy, they all shift